Alright. So as usual, I would like to start setting the motivation. The way I do it, is it really difficult or is it manageable? I mean, it is hard to, of course, generate a lot of compassion and so forth, but are you overwhelmed or? It's okay. Alright. Well, today we go through the stages first to generate a closeness towards sentient beings. Because if we really don't care, it's very difficult to be concerned with their suffering. So to generate that closeness and then focus on their suffering, of course, the way we did, wishing them to be free from suffering, and not just that, but also wishing to help them to overcome it as part of great compassion. And then the altruistic attitude is really just being determined. I'll have to do something. I'll use this opportunity I have as a human with so many freedoms. I'll do something, which is the altruistic attitude, and then bodhicitta. But today, as a reason to get closer, so why do I want to get closer to sentient beings? Well, previously I used the past lives. I talked about the fact that everyone likes to be happy, has this Buddha mind, etc., or the nature of the mind is the same as that of a Buddha. But today let's think about the fact that we need sentient beings to be happy. Simple as that. In terms of food, of course, to survive, food, drink, we need other sentient beings. Education, to learn the things that we have learned, to be able to read and write. So think not just the people who taught you, but the people who fed the people who taught you, and the people who fed the people who fed the people who taught you, and right? And who educated the people who taught you, and who fed the people who fed, and so forth. How everything is connected, and so that because of this connectedness, indirectly, sentient beings are involved in our benefit. And to become enlightened, which is the most important happiness, we need all sentient beings. We need the obnoxious ones in particular. Who to practice patience with unless it's the obnoxious ones, right? So to generate this sense, we need all of them. They're important for us. And so based on that, just that sense of closeness, that we focus on the harmful aspects, it just harms us. We focus on the positive aspects, we draw closer to them, and it helps us on the material level, but more importantly on the spiritual level. Okay, so keep all that in mind as I slowly guide you through it. And it won't be very long, but if you have already a sense of what to think about, it'll be easier. Okay, great. Zoom is gone again, but it doesn't matter. Okay, great. Okay, let's start then. As usual, we start with a few moments of breathing meditation. So just let go of any disruptive thoughts, any distractions, and just be here right in the moment. And then as before, think that Geshe Kelsang is right in the center in front of you. As an embodiment of all the enlightened qualities. And of one nature with your spiritual master, your Lama, or Lamas. And think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. All silently seated around you in their different forms. For those you have a hard time with, we resent or who may resent us, right in the front. And then remember how important sentient beings are. Of course, in terms of our survival, since we're all interconnected. We need sentient beings for our food, our drink, clothes we wear, the buildings we live in, our education, our knowledge. All that is dependent on others. And spiritually, since we want to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, we need all of them. The poor, helping us to be generous. The unruly ones, helping us to practice patience, love, compassion. So based on that, try to see sentient beings as endearing, as important. And generate that feeling of closeness. And affection. Think that they're part of you. And then take a moment to remember how much suffering there is, how much grief, fear, loneliness, and depression. and generate the sincere wish, may every living being be completely free from any of these sufferings, or any suffering in general, and its causes. And may I be able to contribute, may I be able to help sentient beings to overcome any suffering and its causes. This great compassion then gives way to the altruistic attitude that not merely aspires, but is determined now. Thinking, I'll use this precious existence I have at this point, not waste it. Instead, do whatever I can to contribute to the welfare of sentient beings, to help them overcome their suffering and its causes. Since we can do so only effectively when we become a Buddha, let's therefore generate the aspiration to become fully enlightened, to actualize our fullest potential, however hard it may be, for the welfare of each and every sentient being. Keeping that in mind while visualizing the Buddha, as well as all sentient beings, let's recite the prayer. Sangye Chodam Soke Chonam La Chancho Padu Dagi Kyasuchi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sonangi Drola Peche Sangye Drola Shu Sangye Chodam Soke Chonam La Chancho Padu Dagi Kyasuchi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sonangi Drola Penche Sangye Drola Shu Sangye Choda Choki Cholam La Chancho Padu Dagi Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sonangi Drola Penche Sangye Drola Shu. Great. All right. Now about the homework. How did it go? Were you able to do it to some degree? Great, very good. Please don't be disappointed when there is no emotional response. Because although I said, or I forget saying so, it's supposed to, it's best if there is, as part of your analysis, then there is some kind of feeling, like the Tibetans would say feeling. There's no word for emotion as such. There's now a word, but they usually don't use it in this context. So as Holiness the Dalai Lama has on some occasions said, yeah, some feeling should arise. Or Geshe Kelsang Wangmo, some feeling. But of course it's not always there, and it doesn't mean you wasted your time. Okay, having said that, how did the meditation go? Of course it was difficult. It would have been weird if it wasn't. But was it possible, at least? You felt like you could at least manage some minutes to do it. Okay, all right. Well, again, what I said to do, these were of course only guidelines, and you need to adjust the meditation to your own need. But again, also understand what are we trying to accomplish with this, like the self, the very strong sense of an I. Let's not just let the mind get away with suggesting there is this particular self, but investigate further. That's the whole point. And there are plenty of opportunity every day. So if you've done the meditation yesterday or maybe this morning, to continue whenever there's a strong sense of I. You probably can't do it in that moment. Like, wait a minute, this obnoxious person, can you just give me a minute, I need to meditate. No, it's not going to work. But remember, you remember in the evening how it felt, how there was a strong sense of I. Well, let's look at it. Let's explore this. And actually it is said that these times we're in right now are very challenging, more challenging than the times of the Buddha, of course, but they're also more effective. If we use these times to practice the Dharma, we're regaining realizations much faster than at the time of the Buddha. So it always has that, its good side, whatever external problems there are, whatever degenerations there are. For us personally, if we now give all our time and energy to practice as much as we can, and that doesn't mean you have to leave your life behind. You can practice in every situation with other people. Plenty of opportunities. Right? You just need to do it. And that's the hardest bit, to go from the theory to the practice. But once you got used to it, like everything, through familiarity, it becomes easier. And the reward is in feeling better, in feeling more peaceful, your relationships with others improving. So there's the reward. If you look back, the improvement. Okay. But of course we also need to learn the Dharma, study the Dharma. And what we study, it shouldn't be like there's the Dharma that we study and there's the Dharma that we practice. That's a problem. We should do our best to practice exactly what we study. And of course it's up to you. Do you want to be a hobby Buddhist or a full-time Buddhist? Right? What is a hobby Buddhist? It's like golfing. You know how often... Do people go golfing in Singapore? No, you don't really have the space, right? I mean, you have... Do you have? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So you have a golf course, you have basketball courts, you have, whatever people do for their hobby. Well, do you want to make it a hobby once a week, twice a week? Or a full-time thing? The good time is making it a full-time thing. You don't have to change anything in terms of you go to work, you do your usual thing, but you bring the Dharma into your daily actions. In every encounter, every situation is an opportunity to practice. And then you do it not so well, an opportunity to improve. There's no failure, right? It's just, okay, that didn't go too well. Now I know what I need to focus on more. So in that way, our Dharma practice is our daily life. It doesn't change. And the more obnoxious people we have around us, the greater the opportunity. We like to run away oftentimes, surely. But, well, now it's the time to really see how much work we still need to do, and we learn from our mistakes and possibly from the mistakes of others. So in that way, yes, it's extremely important really to put everything into practice, everything we've learned. Right? Okay. Sometimes it's more directly obvious what we learn. I mean, sometimes it seems so abstract, but then you just use your own intelligence. Okay, it seems abstract, but how can I somehow make this relevant to me right now? So fortunately, it's easier with the topic we're studying here, how we can practically apply this. Especially since we start on dependence on causes and conditions. Right? That's the text. Do you have the text? Yes. Okay. So it's on page 13. We got to page 13. So dependent arising, that's one of my favorite topics. And it's so in tune with modern science, of course. Modern science, I mean, is all based on dependent arising. In fact, our entire life is based on dependent arising. I found it interesting how modern economy is so dependent on dependent arising. I mean, if you think about it, a little thing happens in one country and the stock market crashes in another. That is total dependent arising. How people's attitudes and confidence influences the market, right? How the mind, it's really the mind, influences the market. People's confidence in whatever, and it goes up or down. It's really just mental. It's mind over matter. The whole material wealth of this world depends on confidence. Don't you agree? It's the mental state. People lose their confidence, they sell their stocks, they do whatever. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But, they do what people do on Wall Street or whatever, and it's all mainly mental. That may get the whole economy, to its knees, cause it to crash, or rise or whatever. And constant change, of course, because people's minds change. All right. So, dependence on causes and conditions. Now, this is the first of the three, and here, when I talk about the economics, it's dependence on causes and conditions. Someone is trying to get in. Is the door open? I just opened, yeah. Great. All right. Anyway, this is the coarsest, dependence on causes and conditions, is the coarsest of the three levels. So you hear coarse, subtle all the time. How do you know something is coarse? How do you know something is subtle? How do you know coarse, subtle?
It's relative.
Yeah, it's relative. That's true. Everything is relative. But how do you know? I'm not saying you're right, of course. But how do you know something is coarse in a relative sense? How do you know in coarse in relation to what? How do we decide usually whether something is coarse?
It's more visible.
It's more obvious. That's usually the criterion. Of course, you can always say in comparison to something else, it may be subtle. You're totally right on that. But the point is that if it's easier understood, for instance, my coarse anger, you can see it. It's so because of its coarseness, because of its strength, it'll become internally obvious. It'll become obvious to me and obvious to you. Versus a subtler type of anger, no, I can be smiling, have a sweet, angelic smile on my face, and you have no idea, right? Okay, so similarly, I myself notice one over the other. I may have a subtle type of anger or resentment and not even aware of it. I think I'm just so compassionate right now, but then there is this resentment. It may just be a short moment. So then, of course, with the coarser mind, the subtler mind, very subtle mind, I have no memory of any very, very subtle mind. I have very pronounced memory of my coarse minds. So in that way. And then the same with dependence on causes and conditions. You can watch dependence on causes and conditions. You can literally watch, like certain causes giving rise to certain results. Like a domino, like an arrangement of domino stones, how they go from all of them up straight and then all of them flat down. You can see one causes the next door for all of them, so cause, all gone, all flat. So this is the coarsest level because it's easier to understand than the second and third level. And the order is always very important in Buddhism, like the order of explaining something, which makes sense to us having received a modern education. Yeah, what's easier understood, you mentioned first. So it's mentioned first here. But it only applies to impermanent phenomena, not permanent phenomena. But anyway, we are more familiar with impermanent phenomena, because all our sense objects are impermanent, and all our objects of attachment or aversion are impermanent. So it's important to understand everything arises from causes and conditions. And there's nothing that is not generated by causes and conditions, except permanent phenomena, of course. But again, they're not really that relevant in our daily life. Impermanent phenomena such as the self, other people, the body, the environment, they are impermanent. which means they change from moment to moment. But they can only change if there are causes and conditions that makes this change possible. And if you think, each moment is also the cause of its next moment, which is why things are impermanent. Your former moment is responsible for the next moment, for the next moment, for the next moment. Based on that, you can understand reincarnation, actually. Right? So, of course, in Singapore, I think it's easier to talk about reincarnation because there's more of an acceptance versus other countries. But it's still a materialistic country, and there's a very strong sense, matter over mind. You just raise, especially when you have a scientific background, because science is mainly based on matter, trying to explain everything from the point of view of matter, trying to explain the mind based on matter, of course. So we're very much trained in that, and it's a little bit difficult, but actually, what's very interesting about this continuation of a former moment gives rise to the next moment, and that next moment was created by a similar event. So, if you have, for instance, something physical, the mind cannot transform and become something physical. That it cannot do. So, even though the mind, from the point of view of Buddhism, is the main factor, that doesn't mean the mind can turn into a cup. The mind can turn into a piece of a table. That is never going to happen. Never ever. Okay, very important. So, however much we praise the mind and how important is the mind and we talk about the mind, no way can it turn into subtle atoms or anything else. That's not going to happen. So, there is the physical, and a physical object must be preceded as part of the continuum by a previous moment of physical, previous moment of physical. So the Big Bang, sorry to say, was not the first moment of everything material. There must have been something before. Because how can you have a Big Bang, not just a bang, but a Big Bang, without something physical beforehand, right? So there must have been something physical that existed before. Therefore, physical phenomena must have existed since beginningless time. So it's not just the mind, it's all the physical aspects have existed since beginningless time. So as you know, there is no beginning, wrong person ate the wrong apple. No, didn't happen in the Buddhist tradition. I'm referring to the Christian tradition. And I'm not making fun of it, but I was raised in that tradition, and I used to believe very much that Eve ate the wrong apple, basically. I mean, she really did eat the wrong apple. And then that's why our problems started. No, from a Buddhist point of view, there has always been mind. But even in Christianity and other religion, you'd end up with beginninglessness. I actually had a pastor sitting next to me on my flight here. He tried to convert me from I could only eat my meat without him saying, but he really tried very hard. Yeah, and in the end, I told him that his inspiration was great, but he couldn't convince me. I'm sorry. Dependent arising and stuff makes my... He was really sweet. He was very kind. We got a photo together. He got his phone number. I haven't called him yet, so... Anyway, no, he was really sweet. But being Christian the way I know, a bit about... I asked him, was he a missionary? He says, yes. So I was like, I didn't have to ask, actually. But the point is, I asked him, so there's a beginning to human life. And he says, yes. And I said, so who created God? No one. So God existed since beginningless time? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Beginningless you even find in other traditions, right? He actually, because he was from India, he used to be Sikh and he converted. His explanation of Christianity was very kind of Indian philosophical. I like that. It's like, that sounds very Hindu. It's like, yeah, I kind of have my own version. Very interesting how the three jewels, there's the three jewels, the three aspects, the Trinity, yeah, Lord, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. all manifestations of the same, emanation of the same aspect. I was like, what? So no, it was good. He was a really interesting character. Funny how the only man and the only pastor ended up sitting together. He thought it was by the grace of God. I said I thought it was a blessing of the Buddha. I wasn't going to give him that was the grace of God. No. Anyway, long story short. But the point is, so the point is that there's also beginninglessness. I mean, whatever, and we're not good with that. We like beginnings and middles and ends. We like it concrete. So it's not very satisfactory for us to have anything endless or limitless, right? It's like, it's not. Anyway, unfortunately, that's what it is. So our mind has existed since beginning this time. But my point is, bringing it back to reincarnation, that we actually know in our daily life that my mental state now depends on my mental state yesterday, right? It may be influenced by the food I ate, or by the medicine I took, or by the sport I did, okay, all that. But it's mainly clear to us that I was in a crappy mood yesterday, that's why I wake up with a crappy mood, right? We actually know that. We know when we study for an exam, we're not going to take a handful of pills, the mathematical pills, because tomorrow is a math exam. Oh, the day after is an English, so I take the other. No, that's not going to work. We of course mentally prepare ourselves to be able to mentally now have all the information we need and then write it down. So we know that. We know this continuum. We have an instinctive understanding. But for some reason, the very first moment of awareness, if we don't believe in reincarnation, we believe it just popped up by itself, came from our parents' DNA, something non-physical suddenly came. If when we don't believe in reincarnation, that's fine. But where does the mind come from? We need to give it at least some thought. We never think it through really. Does it make sense? Does it make sense that the first moment was something physical? How do you get from it's definitely not it's not like a mixture. Our mind is a mixture of our dad's mind and our mom's mind. That doesn't make any sense. We should have all the understanding our parents then have with the mind of our parents. We should have the same likes and dislikes, or at least a mixture of the two, right? But we can be totally different. Even identical twins, can have a very different personality in terms of likes and dislikes. So if you think about that, so the first moment of awareness actually must have been preceded by the first moment of awareness, just as something physical. The first moment of our body must have been preceded by something physical. There is no other way. So if you think about that, plus think back when you were little, how you liked certain things naturally, when no one else in your family maybe liked them, certain tendency you had, your own children, like, where does that person come from? Like, I don't have this like, dislike, or ability. Their father didn't have one, their mother didn't, and the children do. Like, some people talk about, like, this baby was already like a full personality. Yeah, right, big deal. They had already a whole life behind them, so of course they come with. And then how we meet someone, I usually say this jokingly, there is no love on first sight. You've probably been with the same person over many lifetimes. You just recognize them, right? How you suddenly attracted. Someone comes into the room, I hear it time and again. I knew I was going to marry that person, and they end up married with them, right? So these are past connections we made. And so when we see them, we just continue this karmic connection we have with them. At some point we'll be exhausted and probably move on to other people. But we do, over many lifetimes, we create a connection with someone, and we may be with the same person for many lifetimes. It makes sense. That is explained by this phenomenon. I mean, there's so much that can be explained by reincarnation. So much. so much makes sense. That identical twins, okay, their DNA does change over time slightly. However, at the very beginning of the moment of conception, it is identical. Obviously, it's a copy of, right? It's the same version. So, still they can be very different. One is an extrovert, one is an introvert. They look pretty much the same. Their DNA is strikingly similar and have totally different likes, dislikes, abilities. How do you explain that? So my take on reincarnation, and I think, again, in Singapore, I don't really need to say much about it, but in the West, I usually say that. If you have a hard time with reincarnation, still live your life as if there were reincarnation and karma. It's a win-win situation. In that, if there's nothing after death, if there's nothing, if it's like the way we may think, at least in some Western countries, people are convinced there's nothing after death. Well, at least you lived a good life, don't die with regret, and were a good example to your children and other people. Okay, so because a life that is based on the belief on karma and on the belief on reincarnation is a virtuous life. If there is God and heaven and hell and that's it, and I asked the priest, is it forever in heaven and hell? And he was like, yes, forever. Okay. I was like, is there a gray between, like those who were kind of good and kind of bad? Do you have like an in-between place? I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear the answer from him, and he was like, no, it's either that or that. And how do you decide? And it's like, well, never mind. Okay, so yeah. So the point is that well, if there really was just that, you'd go to heaven, right? That's a place we want to go. So there's a win-win. I mean, what other options are there? In Judaism, I think it's a little different. They don't talk about hell as such. Heaven is also not explained in the same way. But the point being, it's a win-win situation. So to base our life, at least on the assumption that there is, I think is a good choice. Yeah. And then explore it deeper. Anyway, well, it's very much based, of course, on the principle of dependence on causes and conditions. All right. So that every cause, every moment gives rise to the causes and conditions in the next moment. So do not waste a single moment by thinking, oh, I could just be angry the whole day. It's okay. It's just one day of thousands of days. But no, of course, that day counts as well. Each moment counts in terms of our actions and the results we get. Anyway, having said all this, so Buddha says in the sutra on the question of Naga King Anavatakta, whatever is generated by conditions is not generated. It is not inherently generated. So what he means is not independently generated. Whatever depends on conditions, I consider to be empty of inherent existence. All right. For example, so now let's think in our daily life, people, situations, jobs, the economy, the environment, everything is dependent on causes and conditions. Everything, right? Society, education, any other field? The army, right? Army life is all based on causes and conditions. You learn to be a soldier to then be able to fight as a soldier and be able to train other soldiers and so forth. Every situation, everything is based on cause and conditions, right? Everything we experience. So to take a person, for example, a person who are prone to aggressive behavior are not naturally or inherently aggressive, as we may think, or they're just evil. This is a very dangerous sentence. This is an evil person, which seems to imply that's just their nature. They've always been like that. Okay? But that's impossible. There were causes and conditions that caused, in this case, this aggressive behavior. It's not inherent in them, but it was acquired. It was acquired because it arose from causes and conditions. So this character trait is the result of a number of causes and conditions, such as their biological predispositions. I mean, it's possible through DNA or something that there's more of an aggressive tendency at the very least. It doesn't mean it comes through. They say about like psychopath that their brain is totally different. Totally means like it's different, right? If you're born with that kind of brain, that's not the only cause. So don't worry if like you need to have created the causes in the past to be born with a psychopath brain, of course. But that is a biological predisposition, the environment in which you grew up. Yeah, if, the people you grow up with, whether your parents or your neighbors, if they're very aggressive, there's more of a tendency to have, to express violence or aggression. The mental tendencies that they developed in previous lives or in this life and so on. So even now, if I allow myself to be aggressive today, I'm more likely to be aggressive the day after. Right away, it forms a habit. That is just how our mind works. So, as I said yesterday, before we finished the lesson, I said to you, just thinking of dependence on causes and conditions, when we judge other people, when we don't like them, when we believe somehow, maybe even at our subconscious level, they're evil. It's just in their nature to be negative and so forth. Well, let's think again. There's nothing inherent in them. There's nothing intrinsic, but something that they acquired, right? And we have had lives before when we were very aggressive. Look back in history. If we lived in this world, we're very likely to have been aggressive. Maybe if we were men in particular, we probably were part of these violent wars that we read about in the Middle Ages and everywhere. So we've definitely expressed violent behavior in the past, but now we've changed. So it's all due to causes and conditions. So I think it's most helpful in terms of our relationship with other people. But of course also when everything goes wrong, not to despair, to understand, well, I've created the causes and conditions for my experiences. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I may have created them thousands of years ago when I was an Egyptian prince or something or whatever, right? I must have done something, the karma was not purified, it remained with me, and now it ripens. But just as it ripens, there may be other karmas that help me to overcome this negative karma, as to find a solution. Yeah? So not to despair, but rather continue to accumulate positive causes and conditions that may trigger a karma that helps me to overcome this. So karma is never carved in wood or carved in stone for that matter, like unchanging. It's constantly changing. Every day our experiences are slightly different, similar, but never identical. All right, so now this is true, of course, for people, but of course a sprout, the classic example. The sprout does not exist naturally or inherently because it is the result of its causes, such as the seed and its conditions, such as soil, water, sunlight, and so on. That's the usual example given, the sprout. So Nagarjuna says in his commentary on the enlightened mind, he's on this taught this text several times, bodhicitta vivarana, just as the sound of a drum or a sprout arises from a multitude of causes, endless different causes. The external world of dependent arising is considered similar to a dream or an illusion. Why a dream or an illusion? Because everything else around us is constantly changing. It's in a constant flux. It seems solid and unchanging, right? I come to the center, it looks every day the same, pretty much. I can't see on an atomic level how it's changed, how the paint has just become a slight little tick has changed because the sun basically makes the color wane, etc. I mean, causes it to fade and so forth. So therefore, there are these subtle changes that I'm just not aware of. It looks the same. Same people, same guys, don't change. But have changed one day closer to death, all of us. Right? This is the oldest we are ever going to be today. This is the oldest we're ever going to be, right? Or the youngest we're ever going to be, if you want. No, not oldest, sorry, youngest. Sorry, put it the other way around. The youngest we're ever going to be. Today's the youngest we're ever going to be. So if you want to start, I usually say jokingly, if you want to start studying the Dharma, start now. You're the youngest today. Right? So every day, of course, we're changing. Everything is changing. And it's an illusion to think that everything remains the same. It's because it's dependent on causes and conditions. that it keeps changing, it's never the same. So everything is constantly revolving, it's not static. Really think about this on a subatomic level, how everything is in a constant flux. And so then we're not surprised when from one day to another a person goes. Someone passes away. Things are different suddenly. We grow old. The fact that we grow old, in fact, I mean, it's like because we change all the time. It's not like we change once a month or once a year. That'd be a shock. Oh God, what is the day today that I'm changing? Oh no, 5 more! 5 more wrinkles. No, of course, it's a very slow process. So the course change we can see only happens because of sudden change. So it's just an illusion that things are the same. Okay. Lama Tsongkhapa says in this text, in praise of dependent arising, whatever is dependent on conditions or on causes is without inherent existence. All right. To understand this a little bit better, how does the fact that phenomena are dependent on causes and conditions, how does that account for emptiness? That we'll see now with the next explanation. If we take the contemplation of dependence on causes and conditions to a subtler level of ultimate analysis, okay, so bear with me, we also come to see that despite our sense that there's a truly existent, and this is just a sense we have, it's not necessarily an intellectually coarse mind, but the sense that there's a truly existent first moment of the sprout, right? There's a sense, oh, yesterday the sprout wasn't there, now it's there. So there's a first moment when it came into existence. It is impossible to find that moment. It's impossible to find that moment. It is not possible to determine the exact moment when the cause of the sprout has ceased to exist and the sprout has come into existence. Okay, bear with me. So here you have a drawing. Now, if I were to take this drawing, okay, let imagine now. I am a professional photographer, and I sit here with my seed in a pot. It's a glass pot, so you can actually see the seed. And I take a picture from the moment of planting the seed up to the moment of the sprout being visible. And all these pictures are put on a huge washing line, starting from TBC all the way to ABC or whatever. Right? To some place. And I ask you, and every photo has a number. Now I'll ask you, when is the first moment of the sprout? Will you all answer, give me the same answer? If there were an inherent moment, a truly existent first moment, there could only be one right answer. But the problem is, of course, if I take these pictures faster, I have more pictures. I can go endlessly on and on and on, get faster and faster, because there is no smallest moment in time. There is no smallest moment when the two pictures, however fast I take them, that they're absolutely identical. That's impossible. I mean, identical to my limited eyes, yes, but there's always a change, a subtler kind of change taking place. You can endlessly divide a moment in time, basically. So when I say the first moment of the sprout, if you can endlessly divide it, when is that first moment? When is the exact first moment? You see what I'm saying? So you can divide every moment, at least not physically, but mentally. You could divide it further. There's an earlier moment, like if you have a second. So there's an earlier moment of the second and a later moment, and even a nanosecond, right? Conceptually, you can continue to divide it. There is no shortest moment in time. Okay? So if that's the case, there's no exact first moment. Not just that. Also, even if there are not endless pictures, there is a finite amount of pictures that I exhibited outside. Everyone's got a number. Well, you're all going to disagree. I wonder how many people choose the same photo, right? Of this fruit, for instance, if there are 10,000 pictures. Probably everyone has a slightly different sense of what does it mean to be a sprout, as to the length of the leaf, the length of this. So it shows you that there's not even an exact moment when the sprout has come into existence. And then actually each moment of the sprout is slightly different. It's never the same. And we just call it sprout. Each moment we call it a sprout, when in actuality each moment is individually different. If it were an inherent sprout, it would have to look the same from moment to moment. So this idea, Geshe Kelsang, he once illuminated that in a beautiful way when he explained how one thing, though it's changing and different in each moment, we give it the same name and therefore believe that it's the same. Does anyone know the illustration that Geshe gave? It was during his wellness teachings. It was during a review class, but I don't know whether it was with the Taiwanese group or it was your group or the Koreans. Do you remember the example he gave? He gave the example of someone jumping off a plane. Jumping off a plane, so as you're falling down from the plane, even if you use a parachute, you're slowly moving towards Earth, right? So as you're falling, you're never in the same spot, are you? You're not like stuck in the air for a few seconds and continue. No, you're always in a second. But you can still say, although the person is always in a different spot, they're in the air. They're in the air, they're in the air, they're in the air. So it's sprout. Oh, no longer called sprout, now called plant. Arrived on the ground, yeah. I don't want to use the version without the parachute. It sounds super cool. But no, the point is, so therefore, when you're falling, right? So the person is falling off the planes, falling. So at all the time, we say he's in the air. He's in the air. He's still in the air, still in the air. So we call something a sprout, although each moment is different. But the main aspects of the sprout, the main characteristics, qualify this phenomenon to be called sprout. As a group, we basically agree. But the reason that it's mere convention, or by reason of the fact that it's mere convention, we can disagree on when it's the first moment of the sprout, or when it's no longer a sprout, right? Because then the characteristics are no longer that visible. So towards the beginning, towards the end, there's some disagreement, simply because from the side of the object, it's not a sprout, it's not a seed. If you call the whole thing sprout at the time of the seed as well, if we were to agree that we call it small sprout and big sprout, well, it wouldn't be a seed any longer. Do you see what I'm saying? From its own side, it's not telling us, don't call me anything but seed. That's the sense we have, that it's really a seed from its own side. Because we have such a strong sense what a seed means, it's like, how dare anyone calls it anything but a seed, right? It seems ludicrous. But that's just the label we apply to it. We choose to distinguish it. We distinguish between this seed and this object called seed and this object sprout. But if we didn't, be okay to call the whole thing sprout, right? And this is true for like a lot of cultures. I don't know, like in Germany, I'm thinking noodles are noodles. But maybe in Singapore, you have maybe different names for noodles, right? Italians also do. Whereas in Germany, what do we have? Different sorts of beers, right? Or like in some areas, in some countries where you have different types of snows and you have all these different types and different names for the snow. I mean, in Singapore, it's probably just snow. For those of you who been somewhere else and have seen it, right? I mean, does it ever snow in Singapore? Has it ever snowed in Singapore? No. Okay, there you go. So, therefore, you probably don't have more than one word for snow. Yeah, so but in other countries where it snows a lot, they have many different names for snow, distinguishing between the different types. So, actually, each moment of a sprout is different, but it's easy enough to just give it one name. We don't talk about, oh, it's first moment of sprout. Oh, this is moment 300,554 sprout. We don't need to, but in actuality, that makes sense. So do you get a little bit how, when we analyze just how something gives rise to something else, it not being as clear-cut as we think, right? Now seed, now sprout. When do we call it a seed? When do we call it a sprout? It becomes obvious. It's dependent on labeling. It cannot exist from its own side. Do you agree? So with this picture, it's like I didn't have more than these. But if you think of the pictures all the way up to ABC. When is it a seed? When is it still a sprout? Right? Okay. So it's not possible to determine the exact moment when the cause of the sprout has ceased to exist and the sprout has come into existence. One reason is that it is difficult to define a sprout in such a way that it is clear, especially on a subtler level, whether a phenomenon is no longer a seed but a sprout. Another reason is that there is no smallest moment in time. So the first reason goes from the side of the object. It's all labeled, merely labeled, and we don't hold conferences on exactly what a sprout is supposed to be, right? I mean, we hold possibly conferences about what a mind is or what a certain disease is, okay, but not on everything. And unless it's clearly determined, there can be a lot of disagreements. There are a lot of disagreements in general. Is something a religion or not? Is something virtuous or not? Is it politically correct or not? We only disagree because there's nothing inherent from the side of the object, and it all depends on conventions, and they're different. Okay. So that's one reason, but another reason, of course, there's no smallest moment in time, so we cannot determine exactly when something has come into existence. No matter how brief a moment is, it can be further divided into even smaller moments. However, if the sprout existed inherently, let's go back to this absurdity that it is a sprout in and of itself, nothing to do with our labeling, or if we have a sense that it is labeled because it is a seed from its own side, that's why we call it that. If we think like this, based on that sense that phenomena existed inherently or objectively, the way of their own character, in the way in which they appear to us, there would have to be a smallest moment in time, and it would be able to pinpoint the exact first moment of the sprout. Right? So, in that way, we can come to understand that even dependence on causes and conditions, we have a very strong sense, and when we learn philosophy that seems to be supported by it, first you have the cause, and then you have the result. A cause and its effect cannot exist at the same time. But right away, our mind delineates very clearly. Cause over there, very solid cause, very solid effect. But when we go a little closer, we engage in ultimate analysis, which means we go closer to each moment and check, when was the first moment? When did it exactly come into existence? When is it still called a seed? When is it called? Suddenly things are no longer clear-cut. That's why they are not clear-cut. Just in our mind they are. In our mind they are. This is how our mind works, especially our conceptual mind. It uses a term such as sprout, and it simplifies everything. Because I call it a sprout, I have the sense there's the solid thing called sprout. When in actuality, every moment of the sprout, although it's given the same name, is very, very different. My friend John, right? as if they were, because I call this person my friend John, as if they're always going to be my friend, because I called them my friend yesterday, and I call them my friend today. And so as if it's unchanging. I'm so surprised when John is suddenly dead, because it's my friend John. He was there yesterday, he was there the day before, he was there this morning. How can he be dead now? Right? It feels like because we apply the same term, there is this Johnness, my friendness, coming from the side of the object. And since it was every day the same, though John changed so much, I was just not aware of it. I also changed and John changed, but it was so slight, the change was so slight, I'm not aware of it. And I'm so surprised that they died. Incredibly. We know intellectually anyone could die anytime, and every time it happens, we're surprised. I remember our neighbor, not Nobu house, on the other side his brother lives. For those who were in the cloud batch, we live, the nunnery is like in between these two places. Zambala, when his wife died, he had a really nice wife. She would always say hi, and I saw her in the morning, and she had a stroke and passed away in the afternoon. And someone told me, she passed away. And I'm like, no, I saw her this morning. Yeah, but she passed away in the afternoon. And I didn't say it, but I thought, how could that be? She was so alive this morning. I mean, I don't know how alive she was, but she seemed alive, right? I talked to her. But of course, because we're moving closer towards our own death, and so was she. And it just happened, she happened to have a stroke that killed her on the spot, basically. So, all I'm trying to say is that, and we're not blaming the words, but because the labels we apply, whether they're words, if we don't have a word for it, we could just have another image of whatever that thing means to me. So if you don't have a word for the ocean, you've never learned the word for ocean, but you've been to the ocean, you can think about the ocean without the ocean being in front of you, and some image appears to your mind, right? Something appears to your mind. So in this case, it's not the word, but it's just a visual image, almost like a photograph you took of it. That's your mental image. But because our conceptual mind doesn't see things don't appear together with their impermanence, with their constant change. It's almost like just a shot, a photograph in time, or the word. And that suggests that there is this thing, this non-changing thing over there that is just that idea of ocean, like a solid ocean. Where in actuality, like, you were at the ocean, I mean, you were at a certain spot at the ocean. You were not everywhere at the ocean. Who can cover the whole ocean and be everywhere? But we use the language in such a way, I've seen the ocean. So our sense of the ocean is just that. Right? Am I making sense? When in actuality it's so much more. And there's nothing intrinsic to it. We just give that label to it and then believe it's the real thing. Zoom hasn't been working actually, by the way. I just remember it's been a while now. Okay, anyway. I hope that makes sense to a certain degree, how even the first type of dependence on causes and conditions, can move us, can point us in that direction. That things are by no means the way we perceive them, on the level of impermanence, but even deeper than that. All right. So that is dependence on causes and conditions, the first type of dependence. If you have questions, I'll leave them to the next session. I hope that's okay. Is that all right? Unless you need something to be clarified. Yeah, great. So next is dependence on parts. This is slightly subtler because in terms of time, it's restricted to the now, right? You think of your own parts right now. It can only be the self right now, and you think of your own parts. It's not like yesterday you have the cause of the sprout, today you have the sprout. Yeah. But here it's like you can't even separate the object and its parts. You can't really separate them. I mean, you can conceptually separate them, but it's not like you can put the parts of the car over here and the car over there. That doesn't work. So it's slightly harder to understand. And parts also refer to characteristics, to refer to subtle parts that we're not aware of. So this level of dependence is subtler than the previous level, because it's slightly harder to understand. It refers to the fact that all phenomena, whether impermanent or permanent, are dependent on their parts. So they're made up of things, of characteristics, of spatial parts, of parts in time, right? Parts in time, first moment, second moment, etc., that are not themselves. For example, a woman has countless physical and mental attributes that determine who she is. She's therefore not female by way of her own nature or inherently female, but exists as a woman in dependence on, for example, her mental preferences, her body, etc. Right? So the mental preferences, nowadays, that's accepted, whether it's your own preference or not, whether we use the pronoun he or she, for example. Her body, of course, is also part of that, but also the mind. So mainly the mind, I would say, then the body as well. So it's dependent on these different aspects that we label ourselves to be female or male. Do you find some womanness somewhere? Some concrete womanness? Right? Can't find it. I mean, you can find body parts, but they are not a woman. They're just female body parts, or typically female body parts, for that matter. That we identify so strongly being a woman. That's a very interesting thing. I don't know how strong feminism is in Singapore. It must exist, but it's not as radical, I guess, like in some Western countries. But I've identified so strongly with being a woman when I first came to Buddhism, you know. And then I understood, oh, I may have been a man in my previous life. How bizarre to feel I was a man. But suddenly man and women wasn't as clear cut. Because if I was 500 lifetimes before this, I was a man. I'm not really a woman. I should be very unfamiliar with being a woman. I should be so much more familiar with being a man. It was very interesting. We're identifying with certain nationalities. So, you know, like being German, I always felt very guilty about the Holocaust, right? The whole history, you'll be aware of it, how the government is also kind of encouraged that feeling of guilt. Well, it's a little ridiculous because I wasn't even born yet, but still, you know, and it's wearing off now with the younger generation. And it's really funny, I always felt guilty, and when I met my first Israeli friends, I don't feel close to Israelis because of the Holocaust. I think I just like them. I met so many of them when I was abroad, when I traveled. And so, no, it's not that. But I always felt a little bit guilty. And then this one Israeli friend told me, wouldn't it be funny, he said, if in my previous life I was a Nazi and you were a Jew, and here you are feeling guilty and I feel like all these Germans. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, in my mind, although I believe in reincarnation, somehow deep within, I'm German and I'm somehow responsible. Although in a previous life, how do I know? You know, I could have been in a concentration camp. I could have, you know, lived in a totally different part of the world and never heard about Germany and so forth. So we identify so strongly with who we are now. But maybe I was a little doggy in my previous life and identified with my little doggy body. I was just doggies and was for all doggies. Freedom for all doggies, right? Rights, doggy rights for all. You see what I'm saying? So I'm making a joke of it a little bit, but you see what I'm saying? We identify so strongly. I'm Singaporean. Well, maybe you were American in your next life. Maybe you were Chinese, like mainland Chinese or whatever. And we identify so strong. It's only a short time, really, right? And then we're born somewhere else again. All right, so this attachment to I, my nation, my gender, the whole thing, it's so temporary. Yeah? Okay. Anyway, taking the example of a car. Now, you can tell by the cute picture I put in there, it's easiest to find that kind of picture. So this is the choice of my car. There are not many humans that are taken apart and no, I mean, that's my... Taking the example of a car. A car has spatial parts, such as its engine, the steering wheel, and the tires. Okay. many, many more. These are the words I know. It has temporal parts such as yesterday's car, today's car, and tomorrow's car. It has parts that are its attributes, such as the car's impermanence, its existence, its size, and it performs certain functions that are part of the car. Since it is composed of and dependent on those parts, the car exists. You will all agree, right? So similar, we have certain attributes, physical, mental, certain functions we can therefore perform, or certain activities we can engage in. So perform a function is a weird way of talking. We don't talk like that usually. Oh, I perform such a function every day. This is the philosophical term that is used, but it really means just we can do certain things, certain activities. There are certain activities we can do based on our attributes, our parts, etc. Also, we're a continuum in time. There's yesterday's you, there's today's you, there's tomorrow's you, right? Okay, we're continuum. So we can say you exist. Ayadeva says in the 400 stanzas, everything is also a part and a composite. So everything is a part of something else, but also a composite. I'm a part of human society. I'm a part of the German population. I'm a part of the Sangha, right? So in that way, I'm a part of many different things. But I'm also a composite. I'm made of many parts. So every part is a composite because there are no partless particles. There's no smallest entity that is not made of something other than itself. Therefore, it's a composite and it's a part. Thus, even the spoken syllable does not have inherent existence here. Because there's nothing inherent in it. It's always made of parts other than itself. And when you take away these parts, you don't find an essence that makes it a carness to be found, a dogness to be found, an I-ness to be found, right? None of these can be found. We always find something other than itself when we take it apart. We can go endlessly. And we believe there's something inherent in it. If I were to now have a whiteboard here and I were to write the letter A, it almost seems like this A is kind of saying, I'm an A. All you need to do is to straighten the two lines at the side and you've got an H. There's nothing inherent in it, right? But letters are a good example because we're so used to letters. We can read them even upside down. We read them as like, if you're not a native English speaker, or if you're not even that, but if you're not familiar with the alphabet, then you may take a moment. Wait a minute, is that an A or an H, right? But no, we don't have that. Very quickly we can read a whole word in less than a second. So it seems like these letters have a meaning in and of themselves. The A is inherently an A. The number 1 is inherently just 1. The number 2 is inherently 2. It seems like, right, numbers are very interesting. Very interesting. I have to look up this video about this person who talks about the numbers. Are they merely labeled? Are they absolute? Or is there another way? There's an incredible video I saw once just about numbers, how they're merely labeled. I have to look it up. I forget now. Because with numbers, it seems like 2 and 2 is 4. It's got nothing to do with labeling. But it does. Okay, I'll check it as my homework. All right. Okay. Anyway, so reflecting and meditating on this level of dependent arising facilitates the understanding of emptiness again, because although the car exists in dependence on its parts, if we subject it to ultimate analysis by searching for some inherent car or some kind of essence or carness among its parts, we will not be able to find it. And since there is no partless particle or smallest moment in time, we can mentally dissect the car endlessly without ever finding a car. Right? But then go back to what I said yesterday. Isn't there a sense your car has a personality? You can go as far as calling it, giving it a name. Yeah, hold it from me, I think I said it. Because my mom was, I don't know whether it's true, but my mom always called her car Julius Race. I think I told you last time I was here. But anyway, the point is, yeah, calling it something. But even more than that, there's a sense it's got a personality. Oh, today it's making a funny sound. Oh, today it's riding smoothly. Oh, it broke down again. Oh, what's wrong with this car? Right? We kind of say that. What's wrong with it? It's such an annoying piece of metal, or it's so wonderful. So much better than the one of my neighbor, and so forth, right? So, I mean, cars, it depends on how attached you are to your car, actually. It's very much to do with the attachment. The more attached you are, the stronger a sense it's got a personality, right? Okay. So here, if we do this exercise, that's all you need to do. So instead of taking pictures of each moment until you get to the exact point of the sprout, as in the previous case, take your car and do this as your homework. I guess no one's going to show up tomorrow because I got no car left. No, I'm kidding. But if you mentally take apart your car, there are these pictures online. I don't even know. I just found this online and I copy-pasted it. I hope the copyright is not going to be an issue. But anyway, I'm not selling it, so it's okay. You see here, you take it apart, you won't find an essence. And sometimes just mentally going through each part, like doing it with your body. Where is the self? Just take the lungs, put them here. I mean, I don't want to sound gross. It's not like a lot of blood and gore, but really, like, just think of the lungs. Where am I? If you really go through every body part, am I in my lungs? Am I in my heart? If I don't find myself anywhere in the body, am I everywhere or nowhere? Right? I mean, just physically, there's nothing to be located. So it can only be my mind. But then you take apart your mind. Is it my eye consciousness? Is it my nose consciousness? Think of all these different parts. This is your homework for tomorrow. Think of all the different, everything, the different minds, 5 sense consciousnesses, 1 mental consciousness. And the fact I'm saying, I'm meditating, I'm watching my own mind. Right? We say, I watch my own mind. What is really watching my own mind? I say, I have pain. Someone came up with a pain. That is very important. Pain is a really important one because it feels so real. But it is real. No one says it isn't. But it feels very much, it's my pain. I'm owning my pain. As if there's someone sitting there, kind of like, this is my pain, this is mine, right? But what is that I? That pain. The pain is also very interesting. When you do certain meditations, when, like these mindfulness meditations that are done in the Goenka tradition, for instance. Are you familiar with the Goenka tradition? Yes, so these are actually from the Burmese tradition. In the Burmese tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on Vipassana meditation, which is really, it's Vipassana, but it's shamatha. So you're focusing on certain parts of your body. For instance, there's pain. You experience pain. If you're not used to sitting in a certain way, you experience pain. So, but then if you watch it closer, at some point, the pain disappears. There's just a feeling. There's just a sensation. But it's no longer, the mind no longer labels pain on it. It's an automatic response, an important response, because otherwise you hurt yourself. There are people who don't experience pain, and they often have a lot of broken bones and have injured themselves without knowing about it because they don't feel pain. I think it's only a handful of people in this world who don't, whose nervous system has fault and they don't experience physical pain. But for the rest of us, surely there's an automatic response, even our self-centeredness there's an automatic level of it, a more subconscious level, a very subconscious level where there's an instinctive operating self-centeredness. And if you're a great practitioner and you have access to the subtle levels, you can control even that instinctive level. You can, in fact, control your sweating. You can control being hot or cold. You can learn to control all this. It's all dependent on the mental consciousness. Now, we study the Pramanavartika, a very important text. And in the Pramanavartika, it talks about the fact that we can sit straight is because there is a motivation to sit straight, right? Obviously, if I faint now, I'm no longer sit straight. So there is a mind that, despite everything else our mind does, is responsible for our posture. Are you aware of this? Yeah, only when you want to sit super straight. But when you just sit normally, you're not aware of this. There's even a passage that says, for every breath we take, there's a motivation. There's a motivation. So that motivation must actually be active when you're asleep, right? Because you don't stop breathing. Although it says in there it's because of karma in that moment. But honestly, that our breathing and our mind are related, pretty obvious. You get excited, right? You get fearful, right away your breathing increases. So states of mind do definitely influence, especially emotional states of mind. Emotions, they influence our respiratory rate. Okay. So anyway, without going into the Pramanavartika, what I'm trying to say is that there's so many different subconscious levels where our self-centeredness is active, and we may feel we're very, very kind and so forth, and we are, but based on self-centeredness. So let's not underestimate the very complicated mind we have. We have an extremely complicated mind with so many different levels we're sometimes not aware of, right? How did I get there? How did I get there? I lost the thread. How did I get to the subconscious? Cars, yes. I remember cars. Yeah?
The body and the mind.
The body and the mind, that's true.
Pain.
Or the body and the mind.
The
Pain, the pain. Yes, exactly. So when you do this meditation on focusing on the brain, some people notice that there is on a subconscious level a mind that labels pain. But when you focus more and more, that sense of pain disappears. You realize it's just a sensation, a tingling or prickling or something. So people report that. I don't know if any of you had that experience, that it's this pain, the sense of solid pain disappears, and it becomes clearer that it's just the mind labeling, right? The mind's labeling, and it becomes really just, a pulling of nerves and so forth, that automatically we ascribe to it a negativity. So then it also becomes obvious that it depends on the mind, pain. And for instance, very interesting, I find this very interesting. I spoke about this before. If you've ever broken your arm for the first time, you may have extreme joy when your arm recovers and you appreciate a healthy arm. So I remember times in McLeodganj, for instance, just a normal day. It was just a normal day, no reason to feel really happy. It was an ordinary day. It rained the whole time. And then the next day I got really, really sick, and I was sick for 3 days. And the first day I felt better. It was just an ordinary, boring, rainy day. But because I felt better, I felt the same way I felt before I was sick. But in comparison to what was there before, therefore now there was so much happiness. So my happiness only existed in relation to the worst suffering that I had before. So then it became clear, even our happiness, our experiences, they're all relative to something stronger or less strong, right? If you've been just for days and days in the prison and now you're released and you have to sit here for like 10 years you've been in the prison and you have to now spend for the first time after 10 years here in the center on your own, you'll be so blissful. Versus someone who's just been entertained for the last 10 years, getting the most beautiful movies to watch and hanging out with all these famous people and eating the best food. If you have to sit the whole day here, you're going to get bored stiff. Same experience, right? Or my another experience that I really enjoy. when you change money, okay, you change money, you're going to go to the US. Okay, so you've got 100 Singapore dollars. I don't know the exchange rate, but what's the exchange rate in dollars, in American dollars, roughly?
132.
132 American dollars. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Singaporeans. All right, Singaporean dollars. So now you've got $100, and you want to change them back to Singaporean dollars. So today you're going to get 132. Today you get 132. And then you hear, yesterday it was 137. And you're like, bummer. Oh, such a loss. 132 today. Oh, I lost money. The sense I have is intrinsic loss. But then someone tells me, no, yesterday it was 128. And you go, wow. You get the same money. You get 132. But in comparison to yesterday, you feel there's a gain or a loss. There was no gain or loss. It's the same money. You did not think of changing yesterday. There was not even the thought of it. You didn't have the $100. You lost them somewhere and you found them in your luggage today. So you couldn't have changed the $100 that you brought with you from the US. You just found them in a book, right? So the only day you could have exchanged it was today. You didn't have them yesterday. And in comparison to yesterday, you feel cheated or you feel lucky. Isn't that bizarre? Gain and loss. It's you got the same money. You may be depressed or happy. This is where our happiness comes from. Our present happiness is pretty much to do with that. From a Buddhist point of view, everything is the nature of suffering. Right now, the experience we have right now, an arhat would call suffering. Our greatest happiness that we could experience in our entire life, for an arhat, it's a joke. It's a bit like that. One of my teachers once put it this way. He's from Ladakh. Geshe Kelsang Wangmo. Some of you may know him. Yeah. He's also friends with Geshe Kelsang. So he once said, if you think of an arhat's happiness, that is like 25 degrees. 25 degrees, you would agree it's nice, right? In Singapore, it's a good temperature, isn't it? 25, it's pleasant. Not the high humidity, just normal humidity. Okay, so that's 25 degrees. Right now, our happiness is like 2 degrees plus, 5 degrees plus, whatever, I don't know, 5 degrees plus. You don't consider that warm at all. But if you've had worse, if you've suffered throughout your life 15 minus, then 5 is warm. Remember I said that, I used the example yesterday, when you come from India, from certain parts in India, or you come from Germany, 25 degrees could be terribly cold, or if you're German, really warm. Now, in Singapore, that's medium. Okay. And the point being that what we call happiness, now move away from that example with the relativity of the heat. No, I want to express how our life is in the nature of suffering, where our happy experiences are just the temporary absence of a worse problem. You see? So usually because we have self-centeredness, we can never be truly at peace. Our self-centered mind will stop us from experiencing real peace. Therefore, when we experience what we call happiness, it's just the absence of something worse. It's like after minus 15, after a few days of being really sick, then an ordinary day becomes blissful in relation to what was there before. So if suddenly after minus 15, you got used to it basically, suddenly it's plus 5, it's like, wow, the summer has come. Where in actuality, an arhat goes, oh no, 25 at the very least. So an arhat constantly experiences that. When we say everything is in the nature of suffering, we're not pessimistic. We're just comparing it to what we can actually experience. If we eliminate our self-grasping, if we eliminate the root ignorance, then that will be the constant state of our mind. Whether you're sick, you have 2 arms or none, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Always be happy and satisfied. So the Buddha is just saying, look at your situation, it could be so much better. Don't be satisfied. So when people say, oh, Buddhism is so pessimistic, it's just saying, you're limiting yourself. You're what's the word? You are satisfied with something so inferior when you could have so much more. When you could have so much more. When your mind could experience this incredible blissful happiness, independent of external circumstances. Why you're shortchanging? Is that the word? Shortchanging. Why are you shortchanging yourself? Why you're satisfied with so little? That's what the Buddha is saying. Recognize your situation, because right now it's +5, what we call blissful happiness, based on what I just bought, right? But of course the problem is if buying something, then it should remain +5. The more we enjoy this new object, but eventually it turns into boredom, and we lose this. It turns into suffering. In fact, everything. We need to constantly change. We need to constantly change. We can never totally relax. At the very least, we have to eat all the time, sleep all the time, go to the toilet all the time. Even sitting here. If I were to put a camera on you now and run it fast, I'm just like that. I'm not saying. Right? We need to shift position because suffering is starting. Even our body, it's such that it's in the nature of suffering. We need to constantly change position. Otherwise, suffering will come. If we only eat, suffering will come. If we only lay in bed without doing anything, suffering will come. So we have to be on our toes the whole time because our existence is in the nature of suffering. So it's in the nature of -15. We have to try to keep warm, right? And with every new event, the temperature right away goes down again. There may be a short release, and then it goes down again. So we have to constantly keep in movement. That's why our lives are so tiresome. Because we're trying to find a happiness that is really not there. That's just the absence of worse. And the moment we stop moving, the worse will arise. Because our natures and then our existence in the nature of suffering. Does that make sense? It's not bad news, it's good news. Anyway, let's take a break.
Okay.
All right.